With CES just a couple of weeks away, true to form, My Arcade has started dropping teaser images on social media. And this morning, they dropped the biggest surprise so far. SEGA titles are coming into their portfolio. I'll run down what we know so far and speculate on what it could mean for new products next. This video brought to you in part by Embraceware. Learn more about the ultimate game guide just ahead. Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I'm John, and I am a GenXGrownUp. Thanks for clicking on this quick video, and I know there's still lots of stuff from CES 2024 that hasn't yet hit the market. GameStation Go, anybody? Anyway, despite that, My Arcade is apparently taking another huge bite of the market this year at CES 2025. Now, I will be there at My Arcade's booth this year, bringing you regular coverage of all these new product announcements and finally be able to update you on those carryovers from last year. But right now, I want to focus on this image dropped just this morning on social media by My Arcade. Now, it's just a single JPEG, but there's a lot of information in it, and if you're seeing it like I am, you already have questions. I'm going to try to work through those as what we know so far and what I'm able to share. Here we go. Now, My Arcade has historically and primarily had licenses for Bandai Namco titles. That's all your Pac-Man and your Galaga and your Dig Dug, stuff like that. They put out multiple times. And of course, Atari titles. It was just last year before last, that they announced the Atari Association, and they did the GameStation Go and all their Atari handhelds and tabletops. I guess that was 2003. Anyway. Now, a whole new chapter of retro gaming history had been opened up by them thanks to a new relationship with SEGA. Now, in this image, here's what you see. You see there are a couple of what look like they could be micro players or some premium micro players. We can't tell to scale, so it could even be one of those, Jumbotron super duper mega players from last year that still haven't come out anyway. And then we have 5 logos scattered around the screen. Five logos. Based on the ones they chose and what they're trying to do, I think we can make some assumptions. But the first and biggest one probably is Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, this came out of the Genesis in 1991. And so this is the list. This is the name of one game, but we don't know yet. Remember last year they did the Mega Man series, and one device had, 6 different Mega Man iterations. So did they just get Sonic the Hedgehog? Did they get Sonic the Hedgehog the series? There are multiple. It's big in the theaters right now. There's a new film just coming out. So we don't know what, but they have access to Sonic the Hedgehog. So of course we're like, well, we need a handheld of that, right? A tabletop of some kind. What's going to be available? What kind of controls? Because I think nobody wants to play Sonic the Hedgehog with a joystick, because that was on the Genesis. I believe in respecting the title's origin, and it was on the Genesis first, and any ports that not many ports really happened, I guess, just sequels. You kind of want a D-pad. You want those 3 buttons and a D-pad for a Sega controller. What are they doing? I think a micro player doesn't lend itself incredibly well to Sonic the Hedgehog, but the title being in their library available for licensing, huge bump. So I have to assume these, of course, are going to be Sega Genesis ROMs in these systems. Why would they rewrite the whole thing? They've gotten away from that lately. And I think that leads right into the next one, and one of the ones I'm most excited about. Now, I wasn't a Sega person, so Sonic the Hedgehog that's nice, but it doesn't do anything for me right away. But Golden Axe, that did something for me right away. Now, Golden Axe came out in the arcade in 1989, but right away, I'm starting to wonder, is My Arcade going to be releasing the arcade ROMs, whatever, or is this all going to be Sega Genesis stuff? I think all the titles we're going to talk about, and they have logos for here, they all were on the Sega Genesis. So are we going to get the original? Because again, I believe in respecting the original version of the game, and that's the arcade version. The Sega Genesis was good. Don't get me wrong, but it's a port. That's why they call ports ports. They're not the identical piece of software. It's different. So my preference, you're called My Arcade, you're making arcade toys. I wish it was the arcade game. I won't be too disappointed if it's the Sega Genesis ROM, but I'll be honest, I'll be a little disappointed. So, and also we don't know, this is just the logo of one game. We have Golden Axe 2, and then the Revenge of Death Adder, which I think was the 3rd one, and I think there's Golden Axe 3. So 3 or 4 games in there we could get. We don't know what versions, and we don't know in what form. Is it going to be a pocket player? Is it going to be a micro player? Is it going to be a super duper player? Is it going to be a Golden Axe player? I don't know. Oh, all of them in one player. That's what we need. Anyway, okay. Let's move on to the third one. I think this also pretty well informs some of my assumptions. So this one is Streets of Rage. Now, like Sonic the Hedgehog, this was originally, and maybe only? I don't know, there's probably ports. But originally, it was a Sega Genesis game. Came out in 1991, and it's a beat 'em up. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, so is Golden Axe, but Streets of Rage has had, I think, 3 or 4 sequels up to Streets of Rage 4 and maybe beyond. I'm not a Streets of Rageophile, but I have certainly played it, and it's a quality side-scrolling beat 'em up. So, yeah. And again, what about the sequels? Is this a franchise? Is it a single game? What are we doing with it? Based on the silhouettes, obviously, probably micro player or larger or something like that. And you got to think handheld. And again, what about the controls? Because coming out on Genesis, you're going to want a D-pad and the 3 buttons. So we don't know yet. We don't know yet, but it makes you wonder, like, what versions of these are we going to end up being able to enjoy?
The Ultimate Game Guide app for NES has been updated to include Super NES. The app is now free to try with a sampling of content and a purchase option to unlock the full library for each system. Manage both your NES and your Super NES collections in a single app. The entire libraries of both systems are covered with reviews, screenshots, cart images, box art, and information such as genre, publisher, release date, estimated price, and more. Also features tips, codes, passwords, Game Genie codes, and magazine print ads. Sync your collection with a free cloud account and view the estimated value. Available now at embraceware.com/GenX.
Now, I saved these last 2 for the end because I have the most speculation about them, and I think it most informs what we're looking at here in this image. And look, I know My Arcade's going to be putting out more images every day, but even this one, though it introduces an answer, it poses more questions than it answers. So, OutRun is the next one. So, it's funny, we just recently got the pole position racing player that has the nice steering wheel on it. And I remember showing that to a friend of mine. They're like, that's great, but I didn't play pole position a lot. You know what I really enjoyed was this one where you got to pick your soundtrack and you got to pick your path or whatever. Like, OutRun? That would be amazing. And now here we are, 3 months later? OutRun is announced. Now, OutRun has been on the Sega Genesis, but hit the arcade in 1986. And unlike a micro player, I've got to think, if you're doing OutRun, it's got to be on one of these new racing players to have the steering wheel, right? The gear shifter, the steering wheel, the gas, the brake. It's the parts you need. And then maybe there's an extra button for music, or so. I forget what else is on OutRun. I'm not looking at the cabinet right now, but they can modify that. But if you're going to put it in a racing player cabinet that has the hardware capability to run these arcade ROMs from the early to mid 80s, I really want the arcade OutRun. Again, Sega Genesis version is fine, and there are sequels and all that could be included, maybe. My hope is if we're going to get an OutRun racing player, it's the OutRun arcade racing player. But that's not confirmed that it's a racing player at all. I can't imagine you have that cool cabinet form and put a racing game in anything else. I would be stunned, but if you are going to put it in one, again, what version is it going to be? Okay, the last one then, another, this is interesting. I saw Shinobi and I'm like, Shinobi franchise. And then, like, I'm kind of hoping each of these is a franchise they get access to, but this one specifically calls out Revenge of Shinobi, which is the third game in the series. It was initially, at least, on the Genesis. I'm not looking into all the ports. We'll dig that up later. But Revenge of Shinobi was not an arcade game. It was specifically a Genesis game first. So that makes me wonder, does My Arcade not have access to Shinobi and Shadow Dancer? It doesn't matter. Like, I don't know yet whether we're going to get arcade or we're going to get Sega or something else ROMs. But the fact that they're highlighting a logo of Revenge of Shinobi and not Shinobi in general, that suggests that maybe they're just doing Sega Genesis stuff. And this being the last one we're talking about, and I saved it here because of a quick conversation about using Sega Genesis over arcade. The Sega Genesis ports of many of these, they were made by Sega, of Sega games, for Sega's platform, and they're very good. They're not bad ports. It just comes down to, I think a lot of players would prefer maybe the Sega port over the arcade, depending on where they first played it, where you first fell in love with these games. An odd thing happened back when My Arcade did the premium edition Contra, and it had the arcade ROM on it. And the first time they put an arcade ROM in a long time, and so many people went, "Oh, it's not the Nintendo ROM. I wanted the NES ROM for this one." Like, they picked the exact wrong one to put the arcade one in, when in fact people were more fond of the NES version. So that was an interesting choice that ended up almost kind of biting them in the butt, I think, a little bit. Anyway, all that comes back around to saying that I think which versions they choose to include of these games and which ports, or give me everything. Give me the arcade and I don't see them doing that. I think that might be something that's confusing in the market, but I think would benefit, collectors and enthusiasts like us. So who knows? Who knows? What we do know is at least these 5 games, hopefully these 5 franchises, are coming to My Arcade products. And I want to say coming in 2025. That's what we thought about the stuff we saw at 2024 that's not here yet. But I would think some of it's going to come out in 2025. And I expect a lot of it's going to be shown at CES this year, the second week of January. So as I leave you, I'll remind you that if any of this is interesting to you and you want to know more, make sure you stick around and subscribe and keep an eye out. During the CES show dates, second week of January, I will be at the My Arcade booth, sending you coverage right here on the channel of the stuff that they're showing in as real time as I can do it as a one-man band there. So in the meantime, as I get those videos ready, I'll put them here and here. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this quick little analysis. Can't wait to talk to you again. It's going to be an exciting year next time. Bye-bye.